Good afternoon. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes for other people to join, and then we will start the webinar. Okay, so we'll now start. So good afternoon and welcome to RSSL's webinar on plant-based product innovation. Kerry Tanner and Carol Bingley will be delivering the technical content of this webinar this afternoon, and I'll be here to support them. My name's Jane Staniforth and I'm the head of food sales within our commercial team. Kerry Tanner is our product development manager and Carol Bingley is our technical specialist within our product development department here at RSSL. And both of them have many years experience supporting our clients with development projects, which recently has been very plant-based in order to meet the latest consumer trend. So before we get started, let's just share with you some information in case you're having any technical issues and also wish to pose a question as the team are presenting. Any technical issues that you're having, please send a short message within the question chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. The team here will then respond to you directly in order to try and resolve your issue. Whilst Kerry and Carol are both presenting, if you have any questions you wish to ask, please feel free to submit these using the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. We will then do our best to answer the questions at the end of the formal presentation. Okay, so now all the admin has been sorted, let's proceed with the webinar, and let me start by telling you a little bit more about RSSL, so you can understand why we are able to share our knowledge with you today. RSSL has supported the global food industry with a broad range of services since 1987. We work for many of the top global to a number of small startups too. Our UCAS accredited facility in Reading is where our team of 330 staff are based, and our technical expertise covers a broad range of services, including chemistry, physical sciences, biochemistry, as well as food technology, which is relevant for today's subject. One of our key strengths is our multidisciplinary teams available to support client needs, to support with the whole product life cycle. Our expertise as a business is extremely broad. We provide a number of product and contaminant analytical services, as well as those used for claim substantiation, including product authenticity analysis, as well as testing to support free-from claims. We also have a number of services which can support with the resolution of manufacturing issues or consumer complaints, such as foreign body identification, as well as a full suite of physical and structural characterization services. We provide an extensive range of product development services from both food technologists working on the bench developing and optimizing recipes through to analytical support for your own internal MPD teams. So this slide covers all the services we provide to support the industry with vegan and vegetarian products, from product development through to flavor and texture analysis, cleaning validation and verification studies for manufacturing, as well as finished product and ingredient testing, all from a claim substantiation perspective. It is our product development team who are leading today's webinar, sharing their knowledge related to plant-based innovation. I'll now hand over to Kerry and Carol to present the technical content of this webinar and tell us more about the challenges and also the opportunities we all have with plant-based product innovation from a UK perspective. Kerry is going to start by setting the scene and providing an introduction to the plant-based market. She will also cover product labelling and claims before moving on to an overview of the current trend. Carol will then take over and continue by looking at ingredient choices for plant-based innovation, including considerations when developing new products with plant proteins. She will then finish with a view on the future of plant-based foods. We will then do our best to answer any questions that you have asked. So, over to Kerry.
Thank you, Jane, and good afternoon, everyone. As Jane mentioned, I'm going to give you an introduction to the market. So to start with, what do we mean by a plant-based diet? This article from BBC Good Food states that it's a diet that focuses around foods derived from plant sources, but that it may still include small amounts of animal products. And then this is where we get into terms such as vegan, vegetarian, and flexitarian. So if we have a quick look at the differences between the diets, we can see that vegans and vegetarians do not eat meat or meat byproducts such as gelatin and rennet, and vegans also don't consume any animal byproducts, so no dairy, eggs, or honey. Vegetarians may differ slightly in terms of what they eat, depending on the type of vegetarian that they are. Lacto-ovo vegetarians are the most common type of vegetarians, and they eat both eggs and dairy. Lacto-vegetarians will consume only dairy and not eggs, and ovo-vegetarians will only eat eggs and not dairy. Then finally, on the right, we have the flexitarians. A flexitarian is someone looking to reduce their meat or fish intake. They primarily will eat a vegetarian diet, but they do still eat meat and fish occasionally. Moving on to labelling. There's no legal definition for vegan or vegetarian, so companies tend to develop their own criteria, which may well differ from one company to the next. This lack of a definition is seen as a problem in the US and the EU, particularly in terms of allergens and nutrition. So in terms of allergens, consumers that are allergic to milk or eggs may believe that a vegan product is safe for them to consume. However, manufacturers may not have as stringent controls and practices in place as is required for a free-from claim. A product that is vegan doesn't necessarily mean that it's milk-free or egg-free. Earlier this month, the FDF published guidance on allergen-free and vegan claims. They've also stated that the European Commission aims to begin work later this year on information related to the suitability of a food for vegetarians or vegans. In terms of nutrition, in the US, plant-based products are labelled with dairy recognised names, such as soy milk or vegan mozzarella cheese. There's a concern that consumers may believe these products labelled with dairy associated terms have the same nutritional benefit as the dairy product, and in some instances, this could lead to underconsumption of key nutrients. This isn't such a concern in the EU because it's been ruled that plant-based products cannot be labelled with dairy associated names. So when you go into the supermarket, you'll see that milk alternatives are labelled as drinks or a dairy alternative, and cheese is labelled as cheddar style. So as there's no legal definition for vegan and vegetarian, these terms are regarded as voluntary claims. Therefore, in the EU, manufacturers need to comply with the regulation on provision of food information to consumers. So the information that they provide cannot mislead the consumer, should not be ambiguous or confusing to the consumer, and where appropriate, should be based on relevant scientific. So for example, a product labelled as vegan should not have egg or milk present, as this would be misleading to the consumer. The Vegan Society, however, is not against foods that are labelled as vegan also carrying a may contain warning about animal allergens. But then saying that a product may contain milk or egg could surely be regarded as ambiguous or confusing to the consumer. The vegan and vegetarian logos are used quite widely in products. To obtain the logo, a number of criteria must be met. The Vegan and Vegetarian Society's criteria is based on what should not be in there, that no animal tasting has been carried out, and that cross-contamination is prevented. The Vegan Society also asks manufacturers to sign a declaration to state that they've done everything reasonable and practical to prevent cross-contamination. So as we know, veganism is definitely a rising trend. Last year, the Vegan Society found there were 600,000 vegans in Great Britain. Veganism is seen as one of Britain's fastest growing lifestyle movements, particularly for the millennials and Generation Z. 42% of vegans are in the age group 15 to 34. Numbers are continuing to rise. The Veganuary campaign and Meat Free Monday are successful initiatives helping to increase awareness. Veganuary is a charity inspiring people to try going vegan for the month of January without a long-term commitment of sticking to the diet. This year, they saw a record 250,000 people sign up, which is nearly double that pledged to take part last year. And Meat Free Monday, which aims to raise awareness of the impact of eating meat on the environment, is also well recognised. If we move to look at food service, there's now also a much greater choice for eating out of home, with dedicated vegan and vegetarian restaurants popping up across the country. The UK's 2019 Good Food Guide also now lists for the first time restaurants with dedicated vegan menus. So in London, we have restaurants such as Pharmacy, which is a vegan restaurant owned by Camilla Al-Fayed in Notting Hill, Mildred's, which now have 4 London-based vegetarian and vegan restaurants and Temple of Satan, which is an alternative to deep fried chicken outlets in Camden and Hackney. Pret have also launched a chain of vegetarian restaurants. These are their Veggie Pret outlets. And from the advert on the slide, you can see that they suggest that it's not just for vegetarians, but also for meat eaters, as they look to attract the flexitarians. This year, we've also seen Greggs getting on the act with its vegan sausage roll. This was reported as its fastest selling launch in 6 years. McDonald's has launched a vegetarian Happy Meal and a vegan wrap. KFC are due to trial vegan and vegetarian options later this year, and TGI's now have a bleeding vegan burger. So the bleeding effect comes from adding beetroot juice into the burger, and this effect was made popular by the Impossible Burger from the US that's based on wheat and potato, and it also bleeds thanks to the heme it contains, heme being an iron compound cultivated from yeast. So there are a number of manufacturers and retailers that are bringing bleeding burgers to the market. This year we've seen Co-op and Quorn also release new products to rival those that are already on the market. Eating out of home has definitely seen a shift from when I first became a vegetarian, when there was maybe one or two dishes on the menu in a restaurant. Nowadays, it's more of a position where it's not seen as a sacrifice, but as an aspirational life choice. When asked why people are choosing to eat less meat, a variety of reasons are given. According to a survey carried out by Mintel on more than 1,000 adults in Great Britain, 49% said that they would do so for health reasons. There is research that has linked this way of eating with lower blood pressure and cholesterol, lower rates of heart disease and type 2 diabetes, and also a reduced chance of cancer, certain cancers. Another reason often given for cutting meat intake is weight loss. So depending on the food that you eat, you may consume less calories on a vegan diet. Animal welfare, the well-being of animals, and environmental concerns were also found to be big motivators in this survey. And livestock production is now the third biggest contributor to greenhouse gases. So if we look at the market, as a response to the rise of those lifestyle choices, there's been a huge increase in plant-based innovation. It was up 62% globally between 2013 and 2017. There are a number of statistics predicting the size of the meatless market over the next few years, but they all agree that innovation is set to continue and set to rise. Last year, the UK became the world leader for vegan launches, with 16% of new food launches in 2018 being vegan. Previously, Germany had been the leader for plant-based innovation, but last year they dropped from 15% to 13% of new launches. More statistics that highlight the growing trend also include that 1 in 10 launches in Europe last year were vegan, and Sainsbury's reported a 65% increase in vegan sales. So before I hand over to Carol, let me just summarise what I've talked about. No legal definition currently exists for vegan or vegetarian, but hopefully this will change. More and more people are identifying themselves as vegan or vegetarian, or are actively looking to reduce their meat intake. And finally, we can see that the desire for plant-based foods is continuing to rise, and the industry is responding to the demand across all sectors, with ever-growing numbers of new products entering into the market. Thank you. Carol.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. I am going to cover the criteria that you need to consider when developing plant-based products and talk a little bit about some of the ingredients that are used in these products. Okay, to start with, the most important thing when developing any product is to identify your target consumer. And this is particularly important with thinking about the vegetarian, vegan, flexitarian consumers that Kerry's just described, because although the number of vegans are increasing rapidly, it's starting from a very small base, so it still represents a fairly small proportion of the market. Whereas, as we can see from this survey, a growing number of people are looking to cut down on meat and fish and dairy products and looking to try new products. So developing a product which appeals to flexitarians will give a much broader product base and hopefully more sales. Looking at the reasons that people would either go for vegan, vegetarian, or move to a flexitarian diet, the reasons are broadly the same, but maybe in a different order of priorities. So as Kerry showed earlier, for people who don't eat any meat, animal welfare is their #1 reason for giving up meat and dairy products, whereas for the flexitarians, it tends to be a health perspective. And this will influence the type of products that will appeal to the different consumers. Flexitarians are more likely to be looking for products which can easily replicate and replace the meat and fish and dairy products that they currently eat in their diet, so that they don't have to make a big change to their weekly shopping and their weekly menus. Whereas vegans maybe are looking for products which are less similar to meat products. They may be slightly put off by these products which are very meaty in taste and texture, and are often looking for products which are heroing vegetables or pulses and grains. So if we put the consumer at the centre of the development, some of the things we need to consider include taste and texture, cost, labelling, sustainability, nutrition and convenience. So I'll talk a little bit about each of these as I go through the presentation. So to start with, taste and texture are the most important criteria to get right. No matter what the health credentials of the product are, if the product doesn't taste good, then the consumer will not repurchase. So a lot of time is spent focusing on optimizing the taste and texture of these products. And if we start with the plant proteins, which are included in many of these formulations, they do bring some issues in terms of taste. A number of them have their own inherent flavours. They can have some bitterness associated with them, off notes, and contribute some astringency. So selecting the right protein for your application is crucial, and it may be necessary to screen a number of different proteins in your particular product, because factors such as pH, heat treatment, shear can influence the taste profile as well. Proteins also take part in the Maillard reaction, and this may result in unwanted flavour or colours being generated during the process. So this is something else to consider. And finally, proteins can act as a flavour sink, in effect, that they sort of bind up the flavours that you add into your product, meaning that you may have to add a lot more flavour into the product than you would if there were little or no protein in there. Moving on to texture, one of the limiting factors of plant proteins is solubility, and low solubility can result in a drying, gritty mouthfeel. And this is obviously undesirable in any product, and particularly in the dairy alternatives. So again, screening the different proteins in your application and maybe blending those proteins together can give you the optimal mouthfeel and flavour for your product. Bite is something that's used to describe the texture of meat, and often this is quite difficult to replicate using a plant protein, because you want that sort of juicy, firm bite that consumers may associate with a meat product, and often texturized proteins are used to help replicate that mouthfeel. When we look at plant proteins, there's a huge range to choose from, and this is growing all the time. I've split it down into different types of proteins. So we have the legume proteins, of which soya is the most widely used, but pea is fast growing and coming up behind soya. Legumes tend to have a high protein content and be highly functional, so this has led to the development of a number of other proteins within the group, such as lentil protein, chickpea, mung bean protein, etc. Grains and cereals are somewhat lower in protein, but are well accepted by consumers and can be a useful source of protein, particularly when blended with some of the other legume type proteins. Nuts and seeds have good consumer acceptability, but allergenicity needs to be considered, and some factories won't handle some of these proteins due to the risk of cross-contamination. And then finally, we have ingredients such as mycoprotein, which is the protein used in the corn range, and algae and seaweed derived proteins, which are of particular interest because of the low environmental impact of these ingredients, meaning that the sustainability story is very strong with those ingredients. It's not only the source of plant protein which is important, it's also the form in which you use the protein. So we can look at protein concentrates. These tend to be around 60 to 80% protein, or protein isolates, which are higher than 80% protein, and these are non-denatured, so they tend to be highly functional in terms of their gelling and emulsification properties, so can be very useful in the product. protein hydrolysates undergo enzymatic treatment to cut the protein chain into small peptide chains and amino acids. The loss of the three-dimensional structure means that these products are highly soluble and are so often used to fortify and to get a higher protein content. And finally, we have the texturized proteins, which are extruded to develop that fibrous texture which we would associate with meat or fish products. Of course, it's not just the protein we need to think about when developing a plant-based product. There are many other ingredients which go into the formulation. These can include fats and oils. Coconut oil is being used in a number of the burger type products because it can help to replicate the appearance and mouthfeel of beef fat. It's also used in cheese analogues to give the firm texture that you would associate with cheese. Alternatively, vegetable oils such as rapeseed and sunflower and olive oil can be used to give the fatty mouthfeel with a lower saturated fat content. A number of people are also fortifying products with omega-3, and this can be derived from algal sources or flaxseed or linseed. Moving on to texturants, methyl cellulose is used very widely in meat alternatives. This is because it has a unique thermogelling property, which means that as the product is heated and cooked, it helps to maintain the integrity of the product. And so, for example, a burger wouldn't fall to pieces on a barbecue. Other ingredients that are used include carrageenan and gellan, which can form a network, and this helps to suspend particles. So these are often used in the milk alternative products because they can help to suspend any of the protein and give that creamy mouthfeel that's associated with those products. Thinking about flavors and tastants, the taste profile of plant proteins, as I've already mentioned, can at best be described as bland, and often you get some of these off notes. So we look at ingredients such as sugars, sweeteners, salt, yeast extracts, and flavors to help recreate the flavor that the consumer is looking for and mask any of those off notes which may be undesirable in the product. Obviously, for any product, the appearance is extremely important. And as Kerry mentioned earlier, an example of this is the bleeding burger, which has become increasingly popular over the last 12 to 18 months. Beetroot extract is being used in those products in Europe to recreate the impression of the blood in a meat burger. The benefit is that the anthocyanins are fairly unstable, so when the product is cooked, you lose that redness, and it gives the impression of the meat burger browning through cooking. Finally, many products are being fortified with vitamins and minerals, and this is because when we're thinking about the nutritional profile, it's not only the protein content, but also some of the micronutrients which may be lacking, particularly in vegan diets. So things like iron, vitamin B12. So speaking to a vitamin premix supplier can help to develop a premix for your product, which will be appropriate for the product and deliver the vitamins and minerals that you desire. Moving on to cost. This is particularly important, I think, for flexitarian targeted products, because it's unlikely that those consumers are going to pay significantly more for a plant-based product compared to their usual meat or dairy-based product. So when developing the formulation, it's important to consider the cost of the ingredients. Obviously, the cost of the product is made up of many factors, and formulation is only one part of that final package, but I would suggest that looking at different protein sources is important, and the form of the protein. So if we think about soybeans contain about 36% protein. So the yield is fairly high, whereas if we look at rice, it's only 7% protein. So the ingredient supplier needs to find a home for all the rice starch that is prepared at the same time as the protein. So it may push the cost up, it may have an impact on availability of that protein. Also, I mentioned the different forms of protein. Clearly, the higher the processing, the higher the purity of the protein, that will have an impact on the cost of the protein. The other ingredients that you're looking to use in the formulation will also add to the cost. So often it is a case of balancing your optimal formulation with the ingredients which you can put in and maintain an acceptable cost. Processing will add further cost to the product. If you're looking to use a co-manufacturer, it's worth speaking to a few different manufacturers to understand how they can support and the costs involved with that. Packaging is also an important part of this, and many of the consumers in this sector are concerned about sustainability. So you may be looking for a higher grade of packaging, a recyclable, biodegradable packaging, and that may add further cost. And finally, I would suggest considering the competitive set. So will this product be compared to meat or dairy products, or will it be compared to other vegan products which are already on the market? Moving on to labelling, across the food industry, we're seeing a trend towards shorter, cleaner labels, and this is really clearly demonstrated within the plant-based area. So we're seeing a number of products which are being promoted on the fact that they only have a very small number of ingredients in the product. So we've got the product from Innocent here saying made from only 3 ingredients, and the ice cream alternative down below which states only 5 ingredients. This is appealing to consumers but can be quite limiting for developers, because you're not able to use a number of the ingredients I talked about earlier in terms of taste optimization, and it can be more challenging to get that taste and texture which will appeal to the broader sector of consumers. In addition to this, we're also seeing more claims around the lack of allergens in the product. So although these products are not being targeted as allergen free, some companies are choosing to highlight that the products, for example, don't contain any soya or gluten. This is leading to a rise in the interest in ingredients such as pea protein, which has a low allergenicity. Sustainability is one of the reasons that people are moving from meat and dairy products over to plant-based, and clearly the impact of producing plant-based products is much smaller than producing milk, eggs, meat and beef. There is some difference between the different crops, but on the whole, all plant proteins are more efficient in terms of land usage and water use. This study here just shows the difference between cows. They have stated milk here, but milk alternatives. So the difference in emissions, land use and water use. And as you can see, the plant-based alternatives are lower than cow's milk on all these criteria. There has been some concern around almonds in terms of water use, and as you can see, the almond milk alternative is higher than the other plant-based alternatives, but still lower than cow's milk. I mentioned nutrition earlier on, and health being the main reason that people are moving to a flexitarian diet. Both meat and dairy do contribute protein and micronutrients to the diet and are a useful source of these ingredients. And these two advertising campaigns are just highlighting the nutritional benefit of meat and dairy products. So when developing an alternative, it's important to bear this in mind in terms of what is the consumer removing from their diet, and therefore what does this new product need to provide. If we focus on protein, this data from the National Diet and Nutrition Survey just shows where the sources of protein are for the average adult. If we look at someone following a vegan diet, you can see that 2/3 of the sources of protein are removed from the diet. So the person eating the vegan diet needs to compensate for this and needs to be looking to get protein sources from, or increase their intake of protein from the sources that are still available to them. We can look at the dairy alternatives on the UK market, and the only product that currently comes anywhere near to cow's milk in terms of protein content is soya. The other products contain very little protein in comparison. Another product we could consider is vegan cheese, which pretty much contains no protein. They're mainly based on coconut oil and starch, whereas cheddar cheese actually contains 25% protein. So somebody switching from the milk-based version to one of these alternatives may then be making a considerable impact on their protein intake. When we think about protein, it's important to consider quality as well as quantity. And the way that the quality of protein is measured is to look at the amino acid profile and the digestibility of that protein. And there are a number of different ways of doing this. One of the most widely used is the PDCAS, which is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. And some values are shown on the slide here. So you can see that the highest scores are awarded to whey protein and egg, which are capped at 1. Some of the vegetable proteins do come quite close. Mycoprotein and soya are pretty high, whereas some of the other vegetable proteins are somewhat lower in this score. So this is something to consider again when looking at the proteins that you want to use in the product. A way of overcoming some of the deficiencies in using the plant proteins is to actually combine them. So by blending proteins from different botanical sources, you can compensate from any amino acids which may be lacking in one source by blending with another source which is high in that particular amino acid. You'll see this happening quite widely in the sports nutrition area at the moment, where a number of plant-based products are being developed. So, for example, combining pea protein and rice protein, and I expect we'll see more of this coming into mainstream foods as well. We're also seeing products being launched comparing the nutritional profile to the equivalent meat or dairy product. So we've got mince here where they're comparing the protein content, the iron content, but also demonstrating that saturated fat is lower, the cholesterol is lower, and also containing fiber, which the meat product doesn't actually contain. Another example is the range of pea-based products available in the US at the moment, and these contain as much protein as cow's milk, either no sugar or less sugar, more calcium, and are also fortified with omega-3. Finally, moving on to convenience. In the past, being on a vegan diet meant an awful lot of time soaking and chopping and preparing meals. There was very little in the way of ready meals or on-the-go food for vegans. They had to be prepared to spend time in the kitchen. And we know with people's busy lives now that the majority of us just don't have that time to spend preparing meals. And this has led to a growth in the area of ready meals and on-the-go food. And this is an area that I can see just continuing to grow. And I think it offers a lot of opportunity for innovation and new products coming out to tempt people when they're out and about. So in summary, I believe it's very important to identify the target consumer and understand whether you are looking to go for the broad appeal of a flexitarian product, or maybe you want to be more specific and appeal to the vegan consumer. Taste and texture are the most important things to get right, because no matter what somebody's dietary preference is, if something doesn't taste good, they're not going to go back and buy it again. Cost is important both for the vegan and the flexitarian consumer, but I believe that you do need to consider the easy swap for the flexitarians to move away from the meat and dairy products. The trend towards clean label can be very attractive to consumers, but also can make it more difficult to optimize the taste and texture of the product and give it that broad appeal that you may be looking for. Sustainability is interest in sustainability is growing, and I think it will continue to grow. So if you can build that story around some of the ingredients that you're using, I think it will have a lot of appeal for your consumers. And just to remind everyone that health is the top reason for meat reduction in particular. So it's important to build that into your nutritional profile. Think about what the consumer may be missing out on in terms of protein and micronutrients, but also can you provide benefits in terms of reducing saturated fat or adding other micronutrients into the products to build on that health story. And finally, convenience, I think, is a rich source of opportunity for innovation and new products. So thank you for listening to us this afternoon, and we're happy to take any questions.